But I will go ahead and call the meeting to order, and we'll start with the minutes of the last meeting.
President Jack Baker called the Goingsnake District Heritage Association meeting to order at 10:08 a.m. with 11 members and guests present virtually. 59 people have viewed the YouTube video. Secretary Jim Terry read the minutes of the February 20th meeting, and they were approved as read. Vice President David Hampton read Treasurer Ruth Faulkner's financial report. Total monies as of March 20th, 2021 is $15,118.24. The report was approved as given. Maribel Chase's Cherokee Moment presentation came from Cherokee Confederate Civil War records of the 1st Cherokee Mounted Volunteers and 2nd Regiment Arkansas Mounted Rifles that can be found in the National Archives in Fold 3. Maribel read physical descriptions of several Cherokee soldiers. The Oklahoma Historical Society has these records in 2 volumes compiled by Grant Foreman. Maribel published these records she transcribed from the National Archives, and that is available for sale at the Talbot Library and Museum in Colcord, Oklahoma. David Hampton was our featured speaker. His presentation was Cherokee citizenship, readmittance, and the Dawson family case. David explained the various routes to Cherokee citizenship, readmittance, and testimony from the Dawes family case. Jack Baker adjourned the meeting at 11:40 a.m.
Okay, thanks, Jim. Are there any additions or corrections? If not, I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes as read.
I so move.
Is there a second?
Second.
Yes. Are you seconding, David?
Yeah.
Okay. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Minutes are approved. David, did you get Ruth's treasurer's report?
I did not.
Nor did I, which is unusual.
Oh, well, I have it.
Oh,
This is total monies as of March 20th, 2021. Income is $712.69. For a total of $7,165.25. We paid out $1,364.45 for editorial expenses. Total of April 17th, 2021 was $5,800.80. The CD account beginning balance was $8,665.68. Interest earned was $1.99 for an ending balance of $8,667.67. Total monies as of April 17th, 2021 is $14,468.47.
Okay, thanks, Jim. Are there any discussion or questions on the treasurer's report?
I think some of that payout was to purchase of equipment, right? Is that right, Lou?
Okay, good. Okay, there's no other questions or discussion. Treasury report will be approved as given. Okay, and Maribel, we have our Cherokee Moments.
Thanks, Jack.
So we're always
Good morning,
glad to hear.
everyone. My Cherokee Moments for this morning are from a National Archives microfilm publication, microcopy number 234, roll 74, which is letters received by the Office of Indian Affairs, 1824 to 1881. And what I'm going to read to you is from the Cherokee Agency, 1830 to 1831. And a couple of these letters are concerning the trouble at the gold mines, which I found to be very interesting. The first letter is written to Captain Brady, who is the commander of the United States troops. It's written from Pigeon Roost, June the 26th, 1830. The Cherokees here digging for gold are under the necessity of communicating to you the extraordinary difficulties and state of things that are now disturbing the tranquility of the Cherokees. The operation of Georgia jurisdiction over this section of the nation carries the consequence of inhabiting the natives from digging gold on the lands that has always been recognized to belong to them. In the exercise of this state right, we were notified by your lieutenant that your troops will hence cooperate with the Georgia authorities in establishing her jurisdiction over her limits, and in the meantime, our protection withdrawn. In the modification of your respectable powers and placing us in a truly exposed situation, we are impelled to inquire of you whether the operation of the United States law, called intercourse law, prohibiting citizens of the United States from coming over on Indian territory, is to be waived and finally superseded by the Georgia laws. If it is in full and in operating force, please to inform us the cause why the whites are now permitted to dig gold, particularly part of those men who marched on us with Colonel Hardin. We take it for granted that you are already apprised of the intolerably oppression which is daily forcing on us, and for what? Because the Cherokees happen to possess patriotism sufficient to enable them to love their country, improve their people, and preserve their inheritance. We assert ourselves to be the aboriginal proprietors of the soil. Justice and equality cannot, for aught that we can be denied, that it is a paramount claim. Closing with the foregoing consideration, we expect an answer to our remarks and entreat you the countenance of that protection that you may consistently exercise. And this letter is signed your friends and brothers, as signed Elijah Hicks, Johnson Rogers, and signed Benjamin F. Thompson, David England, and George Hicks. And the next one is an extract of a letter from Mr. John Ross, Principal Chief of the Cherokee Nation, to the Cherokee delegation now in Washington, which is dated head of Coosa, Cherokee Nation, March the 3rd, 1830. Mr. Moses Daniel arrived here last evening, by whom I am informed that the report respecting the gold mines on the branches of Etowah River in Hickory Log District is fully confirmed. He says that Judge Martin has lately been at the mines, and it is supposed that there are not less than 1,000 white men, citizens of the United States, engaged in this public robbery. I have written 2 or 3 letters to the agent on this subject, but as you well know, his apathy and reluctance to do his duty when justice is demanded in behalf of the nation. It is estimated that these transgressors procure from $1,500 to $2,000 worth of gold per day. Ought not the United States to make good this robbery of our public property by their citizens? Are they not in justice bound to do it? The act is committed in the face of day and in violation of their own laws, and to the contempt of their public agent who stands here with folded arms, as it were, merely to witness the right of the Cherokees invaded and trampled underfoot with impunity. The gentlemen above named are persons of unquestionable veracity. Judge Martin is at present National Treasurer and for many years a judge of the Supreme Court. And the delegation that's referred to consists of Richard Taylor, John Ridge, and W.S. Coody. And they announced their arrival. They're staying at Brown's Hotel, Washington City, the 9th of December, 1830. And they write their arrival to Honorable John H. Eaton, Secretary of War. Sir, the undersigned delegation of the Cherokee Nation east of the Mississippi have arrived and desire the pleasure of taking their great father by the hand when the president is at leisure to allow them the pleasure of an interview. We are, sir, respectfully your obedient servants, signed Richard Taylor, signed John Ridge, and signed W.S. Coody. There's another letter that I'm not going to read. It's from, and I'll just give you a brief synopsis of what it contains, but it's from George Gilmer, and he's writing to the Honorable John Eaton, Secretary of War, and he's complaining about the Ridge and a lot of the Cherokees riding with the Ridge that have come in and destroyed 14 or 15 houses, so he says. So he's complaining about that, and he says at the very bottom of his letter that he would like him to remove Cherokees from all the lands within this state to which they have no clear possessory title. And that's what he says. Okay, that concludes my Cherokee Moments for this morning.
Thanks, Mary Bell. And I find it interesting, you know, we received $5 million for our lands through the Treaty of Neoshoda, while they took out $20 million worth of gold from near Dahlonega.
Interesting.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Do we have any old business to cover? And Luke, I think you've about finished your purchases from our grant from the Oklahoma Historical Society or through the Oklahoma Historical Society.
Yes, all the purchases are completed now. We've finished out the grant, and I sent the final paperwork this last month.
Okay, good. Well, we appreciate all your work on that, getting the grant and then purchasing all the equipment for us.
You're welcome.
So, okay. Or is there any new business to discuss? Okay. Well, if not, I'm happy to say that we have our speaker, Charlie Rodarmer from the Sequoia Birthplace Museum, and he's been the director there for how many years, Charlie?
20 years now. Came and won't leave.
That's good. We're glad to have you there. And I failed to mention, of course, that Patsy's from Georgia and Jim is from Arkansas. So you got a multi-state kids here, as well as all the people that will listen to it later.
Cool. Outstanding.
So, okay. Well, I will turn it over to you.
Well, one of the things I wanted to try with you all this morning is kind of doing a rough tour of the museum. So what I thought is that we would take and kind of start over here, and hopefully we won't have any technical problems and the internet's going to work great. But for those that haven't been to the museum, we've got kind of, this is as you come into the main exhibit, and this was donated from a community here in, near the museum. It was done by, I remember, Michael Oliver, and he hand carved every one of those feathers. As we started developing the museum, you know, one of the things was we wanted to cover the earlier periods, you know, with the technology and how things changed from the Paleo-Indian to the Archaic. So we talk a little bit about that. And then we get into the fur trade, which, you know, Sequoia's born at kind of the end of the fur trade. And so, but it's still a very important part of his life. And so we have a number of artifacts. You know, we have different, you know, different folks have different dates. And when Sequoia is born, we kind of say around circa 1776. One of the things I wanted to point out here was the Telco blockhouse. This would have been a point, Sequoia was living about 1.25 miles from the blockhouse, kind of the backup. So one of the things I wanted to point out is the blockhouse. A lot of people get it confused. He's living about 1.25 miles from the blockhouse, and it would have been the blockhouse where I feel he would have seen the soldiers, the officers writing the notes that kind of start that spark where, you know, hey, we could create a writing system for ourselves. And so, you know, there's a story that that talks about at Horseshoe Bend. That's where he saw the soldiers writing the note. Well, by Horseshoe Bend, that's 1814. He had already announced in 1809 in the blacksmith shop that we could create a writing system. And so Sequoia had already started working on his writing system in 1809. And so it would have been the blockhouse where he would have saw those soldiers writing those notes, and, you know, the talking leaf, and being able, you know, to start that spark. And so it's also, the Telco blockhouse is a very important spot because that's where he would have learned to blacksmith. According to tradition, Sequoia taught himself to silversmith. And the thing is, I tried to teach myself to blacksmith when I was in high school, and I had the advantage of reading books. And, you know, the problem I had, I could read about how to weld something together or to temper something, but I couldn't never do it. And I finally gave up. And it was after I got to college and met a blacksmith, and he actually showed me those, you know, techniques, and it kind of, all of a sudden it made sense. And so the Telco blockhouse was originally established to run patrols to keep any whites from encroaching into the Cherokee Nation. After Thomas Jefferson came up with the Americanization program, they add on to the blockhouse the factory. And the factory was a trading post, and that's where, you know, there would have been teaching like Cherokee women to spin and make milk or make cheese and butter. And so it would have been there. There was a blacksmith shop. Brett Riggs did some research a number of years ago, and I think it was between 8 and 10 Cherokees that would have learned to blacksmith there at the Telco blockhouse that were blacksmithing here in the Cherokee Overhill around 1810. So, and Sequoia would have been one of them. As we kind of go through, we kind of touch a timeline of Sequoia's life. As the diorama here, of course, family stories and of Sequoia. Let's see if there we go. Was very good with his hands. He would build little model houses and put detail in it. And people were amazed that it would have, you know, working doors or details like a real house would have. As he gets older, he started drawing pictures, and, you know, they said he could draw the best bison than anybody else. And later on, that you could look at one of his drawings and you could recognize the person that he had drawn. So he's very artistic, very good with his hands. And as I kind of mentioned, this is Sequoia, basically, he learns to blacksmith. And I think all the trades that he had before, whether he was silversmithing or he's in the fur trade, that was cash on the barrelhead. And so when Sequoia learns to become a blacksmith, he's now become an occupation of necessity. Because if Jack tears up his plow, he needs it fixed today. So Jack would throw the plow in the wagon, go down to Sequoia's blacksmith shop and say, hey, I need this fixed. I need to get back out in the field, start plowing, and finish sowing my seed, raise my crop, and harvest it. And so I need you to fix the plow today. Well, Sequoia take a look at it and say, oh, you really tore that up. That's going to cost you $3. Well, I don't have $3. I spent all my money on my seed. I can't pay you until this fall. And so here's where I think Sequoia's problem begins, is that he can't remember what people owe him for the work that he does. And so what Sequoia does is he created a numbering system first. And he basically takes that numbering system and uses it as an accounting system to be able to remember what people owed him for his work. And so, so he creates this numbering system, and I'll show you when that, it's at the originals at the Gilcrease Museum in Tulsa, Oklahoma. But this diorama kind of depicts one of the stories where there's a number of the very traditional Cherokees, and Sequoia is having a discussion with them, and they basically think he's crazy because they feel if the creator had wanted them to read and write, he'd already given them the ability. He'd given the Cherokee the ability to live in the mountains, to know nature, to know the plants and the animals. And, did you ever have to write anything down? I've never had to read anything, so we don't need that. And so Sequoia, according to the story, kind of referring back to Moses and kind of the 10 Commandments, but he picks up this rock and he takes this pen and he starts scratching these symbols on it. And basically says, these could represent our words, and we could read and understand and put our thoughts down. And so, but there again, the very traditional Cherokees thought it was a useless task, that there was no way that he would ever create this writing system. This section we call Words That Win Wars. And so this is kind of our soldiers and militia here. And then we've got our Cherokee that are down at Horseshoe Bend. And I'll kind of stop right here. So, one of the things, there's a multitude of stories. And I think, some people get things mixed up. And, this is one of those things that, oh, yeah, Sequoia served in the War of 1812. That's where he saw the soldiers. Forgetting about that Tellico Blockhouse. And so, I think the Tellico Blockhouse is a much more important Cherokee site than it's kind of given credit for. Dr. King, when we were actually setting up the exhibit, he had kind of got this story in his head that this was the influence, and he wanted to make this the big highlight point of the museum, is that, Sequoia sees the soldiers writing these notes, and, this note says, Captain Smith, bring 100 men, your company to the forks of the river on Thursday. And this little piece of paper told him to do that and instructed him to do that. And so, we could do that. We could capture that and create our own writing system. Well, as I mentioned earlier, he had announced in 1809 in the blacksmith shop, hey, we could create a writing system. He's already been working 5 years. At Horseshoe Bend, 1814, he's going to be working another 7 years before he actually finishes it in 1821. And so what Dwayne and I got to talking about is this was probably maybe rejuvenized him. If the soldiers, if the militia or the soldiers get killed or wounded, their officers or NCOs can write back to their loved ones and tell them what happened. The Cherokee, unless they send a runner or unless they can read and write English, they have no way to communicate back to their families that one of their friends had been killed or wounded. And so by watching this, I think we felt that this kind of energized Sequoia to keep working, to not give up, and to keep trying to figure out some way to create this writing system. So we've got a number of different artifacts from the War of 1812. And then this theater is it lasts for about 4 minutes. And so we won't go into this one and do this one, but we'll talk about it just here in a second. Kind of come around. There's a number of different stories that of how Sequoia creates the syllabary. In our theater number 2 here, it's kind of like Sequoia and Aoka are kind of Sequoia's been working on this, trying to create a writing system. He's tried, symbols for sentences, and that was too much. And then he comes up with hieroglyphics, and then he works, and kind of in our shadow theater, Aoka kind of comes in and is like, hey, I want to help, and kind of horsing around. And Sequoia kind of goes, oh, Aoka, and kind of breaks down the sound, the syllables. And so he kind of, then develops his symbols and gives them to the sounds. And so it's kind of through Aoka and Sequoia, they kind of work out the syllabary. My personal story that I like is, it's just, he spent all these years trying to create the syllabary. And my particular story I like is he's just sitting, listening to the birds one day. And as he listens to the bird's song, he hears repetitive sounds. And that gives him an idea. Well, what if I break down the sounds of the Cherokee language and give them symbols? So he starts listening to his family and his friends and his neighbors, and he starts pulling out these repetitive sounds, and he gives them symbols. Now he finds 87 sounds, and he gives them 87 symbols that comes out of his own mind by his own hand. Now there's a few symbols that look kind of familiar, and we'll look at those in just a minute. But most of them are very flowing and very cursive. And so, as the story goes, he had finished the syllabary, and there's several other stories in there, but I think he actually writes his speech. He had a court case, or he went to a court. Do you know about that, Jack?
No, I don't remember that.
Well, at some point, I remember he wrote out his speech, and he gave his speech. He read his speech in public, and people in the community started talking about it. And it's like, things were going around. Well, what's he actually up to? Is this witchcraft, or And so rumors started going around the community. And so when that, what I tell our tour groups, the Cherokees had always had laws before the Europeans ever showed up. They were oral laws. Everybody, you knew what to be a proper Cherokee man or proper Cherokee woman. Everybody knew the laws. As you were growing up, you were taught it. And so one of the laws was you could be put to death by witchcraft. And so, these rumors turn into, well, he's maybe doing witchcraft. He's right. And so the elders call Sequoia, and Aoka goes with Sequoia to be judged, to be reviewed by the elders. And so when they get there, they take little Aoka away, and they carry her off so she can't see, hear, or know what's said. And Sequoia tells one of the elders to start speaking, and he talks in Cherokee, and Sequoia, using his syllabary, writes every word he says down on a piece of paper. Then they bring Aoka back, where she had been taken so far away she couldn't hear, she couldn't see, didn't know what was said. And Sequoia hands her the talking leaf. And why does he call it a talking leaf? It kind of flutters in the wind, if it, blows around. And if you understand the symbols on the leaf, what does it do? It talks to you. It tells you what it says. And so little Aoka reads word for word what the elder told Sequoia. And so it's with that test, it proves, first of all, this isn't evil. This isn't witchcraft. This is incredible. We can now actually put our Cherokee words on paper. As I tell our tour groups, how did the Cherokees communicate up to this point? The oral tradition. What am I doing right now? Storytelling. And so the oral tradition, storytelling, mother telling daughter, and grandfather telling grandson. That's how the Cherokee passed on their history, culture, bad events, great events. And now they had the power of the written word. And so they realized we could communicate. I didn't have to physically go and see Jack Baker. I could write him a letter now. We could communicate as a nation. We could create a printing press, and we could communicate as the Cherokee Nation. And so as a result of that, in 5,000 years of human civilization and all the records around all the world, and all those records, no one person has ever created a writing system who was illiterate by himself. And so Sequoia never learned English, German, English, Spanish, Latin, but on his own, he created the Cherokee Syllabary. So as we get kind of over here, this is, can you see that? Is that?
Yes, we can.
Okay. There we go. I think that's got it all.
Pretty much all of it, yes.
Okay. Well, as I mentioned, these are Sequoia's symbols. And see, that's a lot of things a lot of people didn't know, and they always just assumed this is the symbol. And one of the things that I wanted to talk about is there's a whole number of stories and legends and things about Sequoia. And, you know, there's certain things that we know, it's carved in stone, that we know about Sequoia. And, you know, so there's not many people will argue about that, you know, certain points in his life. And then there's the tall tales that we get into. And, you know, that is where, like, the story of his wife burning his work. You know, there's the whole level from she's just frustrated. Sequoia's not been doing his chores. He's been focused on this, trying to create this writing system. He's wasting his time. And she just grabs all of his papers off the table in the kitchen and throws them in the fireplace. And then there's the story on the other far end that he had went out and built him a little cabin in the woods where he had his own private office, and he would go there and he'd work on the writing system. And one day when he wasn't there, his wife and some neighbors went and they burned it to the ground, destroying his work. So, you know, we're pretty much sure that Sequoia's work was destroyed, but was it just off the table into the fireplace, or did it, you know, they burned the cabin to the ground? So, you know, it's, you kind of you can just read the stories and kind of make your own mind up where you kind of think it falls. And then there's like the lies, the just total made up for whatever reason. Some may be familiar with the book, Tell Them They Lied by Traveler Berg. It's got a lot of good history in it, but it's got a lot of bad stuff. The other one that I like to use to illustrate about the lies is when people don't know about Sequoia's original syllabary, they see this and it's like, oh, there's one story that flies around, and I hear it every once in a while. Sequoia was walking down the road and he found a bunch of papers on the side of the road. He was just laying there, and he scoops up, takes all these papers, and he takes them back home, and he starts studying them. And they've got German, and they've got Greek, and they've got French, and they've got English. Well, he doesn't know what they say, but he likes that character, and he liked that one. So he takes these symbols from these papers that he found on the side of the road, and that's why the syllabary looks like that. It's like, no, 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 no. He creates these, and, you know, I've heard two different schools of thought. One is that he was influenced by these lines and curves by the insects or butterflies, patterns in animals, and that's where he gets the, you know, the swirls. And others say it was kind of the influence of him being a silversmith and doing engraving. So I think it has a little bit of both. And it's kind of interesting that he must have seen a clef symbol. Can you see that one? And, you know, there's a couple of others that look like an A, and there's like a as. So, you know, but his symbols kind of, as I say, they come from his mind by his own hand, and they didn't exist really anywhere else in the world. And that's the problem. When the Cherokee, when Elias Bootnott starts going around raising money to buy the printing press, they can't afford to buy the press because they can't afford to create all the type. That these didn't exist. So you would have had to have started all the way back at the very beginning, and then you would have had to have created all the different sizes and the fonts, and they couldn't afford to buy the printing press with this syllabary. But so basically what I understand is that It was Elias Bootnott, probably Reverend Samuel Wooster, that was involved in actually taking Sequoia syllables and turning them into these. And if you look, that exists, cheaper, 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 cheaper. Those symbols existed. Those molds to cast that type it was there. And so they didn't have to create. Now we can take and put a little tail on it. We can put a little squiggle on it. We can put a line through it. We can flip it upside down. That would add a little money to it, but it makes it look different. And then you get a few symbols that exist nowhere else in the world, and then that makes it uniquely Cherokee. And so, so basically, that's how we end up with the syllabary. I think most folks will refer to this as the Sequoia syllabary, and then this is the Cherokee syllabary. So,
Excuse me. On the Sequoia syllabary, if you look at a page of German script, the ancient German script that the Moravians were using at Spring Place, you'll see they look very similar.
really?
I think you probably saw some of the Moravian script also.
Okay. Well, cool.
So, but take a look, like go on the Moravian Archive site. I'm sure they have, or some of our Moravian books, that records of the Moravians among the Cherokees. Look at some of the German script in it.
Okay. Well, this is the new part, and I figure you all might be really interested in this. I wanted you to kind of see the museum. You can kind of see back over where we talk about Sequoia being an old settler, and basically teaching the syllabary and trying to kind of be I guess, a peacekeeper or an arbiter between the old settlers and the new settlers after the removal happens. And then we talk about his trip to Mexico, and then about where he, either being buried in northern Mexico or buried in southern Texas, and we don't really know where he's buried. So we know he dies in August of 1843, but we don't know exactly where he's buried or what day he died. So so we come over here and I'll kind of show you. Now, the Cherokees, Elias Bootnott, Elias Bootnott goes around and raises money and to purchase the printing press. Well, they have a problem, as we mentioned. So the type, so it's probably Elias Bootnott, Reverend Samuel Wooster, and I'm sure there may be several others. I don't know if there was a discussion I was having with Brian yesterday about if Sequoia was involved. It would be interesting if there was some letters or that went back and forth, in Sequoia's syllabary, talking about the new syllabary. So there's the Gilcrease, in the Gilcrease, there's that syllabary that shows the Sequoia symbol and it shows the new symbol. So that probably to teach the people that had learned to speak or read Sequoia syllabary, to teach them the new syllable so they could read the newspaper when it started coming out. So what they do is the Cherokees buy, it's called a small royale, and it's the royale referred to the newspaper size, which was 19 by 24 inches, and the press was called a Union model, and it was a small royal. So the Union means that it was a Union model. It was made in Union Model Works in Chicago. And I'd got it in my head at one time it was in Boston, and I'll explain that, why that happened. But it was made in Chicago, but then it traveled, and that's why we would need to do some research, but it ends up traveling by water down to Savannah, and then it comes up to Augusta, Georgia, and that's where the Cherokees go and pick it up in Augusta. Now, when they get there, the problem is they shipped the printing press. The Acorn printing press that they bought, it's called a Union Acorn printing press is another term that you can use. And it weighed about 2,000 pounds. Then you've got the type. So we're talking about lead type, and it takes, imagine trying to print a 4-page, 5-column newspaper like the Phoenix. So you're going to have a lot of type. And so that's a lot of weight right there. And then they also had shipped the paper with it. Well, when the Cherokees go to pick it up, they couldn't transport the paper. And so the paper was actually left or given or whatever was sold down in Augusta. And so they just brought the printing press and the type back up to New Echota. Now they set up the press, and the problem with the press was, well, they didn't have any paper. And that was the delay on the first issue of the Cherokee Phoenix being printed. I normally do this because I usually have somebody from Knoxville in the crowd, but if you're familiar with Knoxville, Tennessee, there's a place where it's called McKay's Used Books and CDs, and great place, but it's on the road, and the road is paper mill. And so the Cherokees came up to Knoxville, Tennessee to paper mill and bought their paper. So the Cherokee Phoenix was printed on Tennessee paper. So, this is a little bit I want to read real quick. I'm not sure if anybody's read this or seen this before, but Dr. King had found this, and it was one of the things that he had emailed to me and other folks. But this is a brief history and a description of the press by John Wheeler, who's the first printer. And John Wheeler says, let me back up just a little bit there. So John Wheeler, he says, the Cherokee press and the type were shipped by water from Boston in November of 1827. They arrive in Augusta, Georgia via Savannah and finally reach New Echota on January 1828 after an overland trip by wagon. The press, a small royal size, was none like I had ever seen before or since. It was cast iron with spiral springs to hold the plates. At the time, a new invention. Excuse me. We had to use balls of deerskin stuffed with wool for inking. Okay, so that was those, and we're still looking for those. Those things, the Tennessee Museum in Nashville, Tennessee State Museum, has a set. The guy that bought them no longer works there, so I can't find those. So if anybody knows where those balls to ink, we're looking for them. We're looking for some. Let's see. We used the balls of stuffed with wool for inking, as was before the invention of the composition roller. So, got the composition roller there. John Candy, a native half-breed, could speak the Cherokee language and was great help to me in giving me the words where they were not plainly written. This is also kind of interesting. The absence of the newsprint caused a delay in the publication of Volume 1, Number 1, the Cherokee Phoenix. A supply finally was obtained from Tennessee on February 21st, 1828. There appeared the inaugural issue of the father of America's Aboriginal newspapers. It was the journal of 4 5-column pages measuring 21 by 14 inches. The vignette included a representation of representation of the famous phoenix. The Egyptian bird, which lived 500 years ago, was consumed by a cleansing fire and rose from its own ashes in all its youthful freshness. The first issue that the weekly Phoenix could be procured for $2.50 a year in advance, or you could pay $3.50 at the end of the year. So rates were reduced to $2 and to $2.50 for non-English readers. So if you were a Cherokee reader, you got a discount. And I wonder if that was carried over when they sent it issues overseas, like to Europe. But I seems like you want to charge more to send it over to Europe. But so what we have, back up again, you can kind of see, Dr. King and I started searching. We both were making phone calls, doing internet searches, trying to find a Union Acorn printing press. And we actually did find two. One, I think, is up north in a museum, and one's out, I think, in California, out west in a museum. And of course, we couldn't get our hands on those. And so we kind of continued the search. And I kind of got into the letterpress gang, I guess, the collectors and the dealers. And so ended up finding, was referenced to a gentleman named Mr. Jacobson. And they said he's the guy you need to talk to because he is like, that's all he did. And Mr. Jacobson, actually, his business was setting up those giant printing presses, like for the Post or the Washington Times or New York Times, these giant printing presses to print newspapers. And so he had actually retired, and his son was running the business now. And Mr. Jacobson, all those years when he was traveling around the world setting up these presses, he would buy, look for printing presses. And he had a warehouse in New Jersey that was full of old printing presses. And so when I give him a call and told him what we were trying to do, and he's like, good luck finding a Union Acorn press. And I said, well, we're just trying to find an Acorn press. We want that same type of technology. He said, guess what? I have an 1833 Otis Tufts Acorn printing press. And so it's like, ooh. And so I keep saying printing press, but the other word I'm saying a lot of, Acorn. Do you see that shape? So this is the exact same technology. This printing press is 7 years newer than the printing press that the Cherokee bought and brought to New Echota. So this one's just a little bit newer, but it operates the exact same way that the Union Acorn press operated. And so what I'll kind of show you is, okay, if you can kind of see this, okay, this is the 36, kind of hard to maybe come at this angle, kind of you can see all the type. We actually organized the type like the syllabary. So when you're, when we're setting type, even though Brian and I don't speak Cherokee or read Cherokee, we can, if we have a problem, we can refer, we can find the character here, and then we know where to go in the drawer to actually pull that piece of type out for, let's see, where's a really cool one? Yeah, so here you go. So you can pull up. Oh, I don't know where the camera is. So there's that piece of type. So you have when you're printing a newspaper, you've got to have all different sizes of type and different fonts, and of course the Cherokee. And so we've got the 36 point in here. Then we also have, this is, that's the extra 36. This is the italics, 12 point. This is like the really, this is the real tiny print here. See. And then that's why we have so many drawers, because you've got all this different type. And like I say, this is 12 point italics. So I was wrong. That was probably just normal case. So, and then here is, I don't have this one labeled. I can't tell what it is. We're still working on organizing. I think this is the 36 English. So basically you see all these drawers. Now, what we start doing is we take, it's called a composing stick. So this helps make all that insanity a little bit sane. So what you do is you come up with, you can come up and say like you're going to print, you know, just that first paragraph. You've actually got 1, 2, 3, 4 types, 4 different types right there in the very beginning of that column. So what you got to do is you would start working, and typically you can work from the bottom and work up is the easiest way. But you go through and you would pull your type. For instance, okay. Well, I would go through and I would pull the type out and I would actually set it in here, and I would work it maybe 3 or 4 lines of type. Now the thing you've got to remember, for us to be able to read the newspaper, the type is backwards. So you've got to get it in your head to work backwards. So that actually, you're kind of setting it backwards and the type is backwards. And so when you place it in the printing press, then you put the ink on it, put the paper and press it, then it peels off and you can read it. So, so you start with that and you begin to set your type. Now, if we come over here and look, we've already set. Can anybody tell me what that says? Did I get it there? Can anybody see that?
The Sequoia Birthplace Museum.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir. So what you have to do is you set the type. Once you get your type pulled, Sequoia Birthplace Museum, and then you've got the Cherokee translation of Sequoia Birthplace Museum here. And then what you have to do is you put these spacers in. You place these spacers to keep the type tight. The type can't wobble. If it wobbles, the press can damage your type. So you place the type, you put these spacers in, and then you've got these, I think they call these coins, and the coins are placed in here. This is called the chase, which is it's just a steel frame. And so inside the chase, we set the type, then we put the coins, and then we've got these, which we actually tighten in. There's a wrench that we can take this wrench, stick it in here, and we can loosen it by like that, or we can tighten it up, and that's what locks the type in and keeps it from shifting and moving. So once, oh, real quick, well, okay. So we have our coin with the type, it's all set, it's all locked in. And so now we're ready to actually print. And so you would actually do a proof first to make sure everything's spelled right. And you will look at it to make sure your proportions are right. And we're using an ink. Printer's ink is made so that it takes a while to dry. So when we do print, we have to lay the papers around and let them dry at least overnight, so that they won't bleed onto the sheet. If you stack them up, they would bleed onto each other. And so so you have to let them dry. So the ink dries very slow, and that enables you to print long time, all day long without your ink drying up. And so, and what you do is you just kind of take the roller. If we had those deer skins, it would look like this. You would just be you'd rock it in the ink, spread it out even, then you would come over here and just kind of rock like that. But using the roller here, we just kind of go along. We make sure that we're getting the ink evenly. And then what we do, we take the paper and we place it on top. Now what happens is, and see this, I was learning all this, that you use these spacers. This is kind of what, you place this over the top. This adds a little space to it. If you've got some type that's got like a little light, what might be happening is that type is worn down. So you would actually take the type up out of the chase and maybe put a piece of tape under it, or just put a little piece of paper. And that may raise it just a hair enough that it makes a really good print. So a lot, you crank in the handle, and then you pull, this is why they call it a press. As you pull this, the plate goes down, it presses the paper against the ink on the type. And it's not a lot of pressure, it's not a lot, but and we've not got this really set up to do production. Ooh, nice. And so this would be our proof. So we would look at it, and even though I'm a novice and a very, very, very new beginner to letterpress, this looks really good. I mean, it's almost too dark though. I'm put almost too much ink on there, but just to kind of show you how this kind of works. Now, if we were doing this in production work, we would actually have little tabs that would make this a whole lot quicker. Because what I would, every time, we'll go through a whole process so you see. So I have to ink it. So I have to ink it. Place the paper. Place my space. I will crank this in. Press. Crank it out. So there's our second one. And it looks pretty good too. So imagine we're going to print a newspaper. It's going to be 4 pages, 5 columns, and we want 1,000 newspapers. How many times have I got to ink it, crank it in, press it, crank it out, take that piece of paper off, ink it, new piece of paper, crank it in, pull it. To do 1,000 newspapers, that process is going to take at least 2,000 times, because you're going to have to do you'll have the front page, page 2, page 3, and page 4. So you would have 1 and 4, 2 and 3, and so you would have to go through 2,000 times to get 1,000 newspapers. So it was a little bit involved to print a newspaper in the 1800s. Are there any questions?
Well, thanks, Charlie. We appreciate that.